Good afternoon. I'm speaking to you from the lands of the Ogurupul and Kitabul First Nations peoples of Australia. And I pay my respects to them and to elders past, present and emerging, for they are custodians of a truly sustainable culture. The title to my presentation could be considered sensationalist, but I'm going to argue that nosebands are aiding and abetting a number of welfare issues, including one which likely violates animal cruelty laws in many countries. The noseband is currently a compulsory accessory in dressage competitions, and today the sight of a horse competing in any of the Olympic disciplines without one is so rare that it makes headline news. Some people say the noseband improves the horse's appearance, that it frames the horse's face, which sounds nice. However, even the most traditional experts admit that the primary practical function of the noseband is to keep the horse's mouth closed. Meanwhile, the FEI, the International Equestrian Federation, admits that the bit and the noseband work in conjunction, which is a crucial piece of evidence in arguing my case. Because as if we needed it, evidence came out recently showing that horses will open their mouth to alleviate the oral tissues from pressure. Mouth gaping during exercise is not normal horse behavior. The rider at the end of those reins is demonstrating to the world their failure to train a light stop response. And that rider is me. You can see this very clearly because the noseband is quite loose and my horse is objecting. It is very reasonable to say that if nosebands were loose or not fitted at all horses would demonstrate unequivocally how good or bad their riders really are in every single downward transition and half halt. If you took nosebands away today, however, riders would have to change their training practices and install very light rein aids, working to achieve self-carriage. The benefits is that bit severity and rein tension measures would eventually reduce to minimal and horse welfare outcomes would improve. Performances would get closer to the ideal notion of the horse performing all movements as if on their own accord. But of course, some people do not accept that bits and nosebands are a welfare issue at all. I grew up teaching complete beginners, kids and adults, mostly city people who had never been up close to horses before, and I can't tell you how many times I watched them be so surprised and, to be honest, quite alarmed when they realized that the reins I was asking them to pull on were attached to a metal bit and that it was inside the horse's mouth. And I'm embarrassed to say that every time this happened, I would tell them not to worry because there's this perfect gap between the incisors and the molars for the bit to sit comfortably, the interdental space or diastema. I hope that with this presentation I'm making up for the arrogant ignorance of my youth. One of the welfare topics of special interest to me in the last decade has been the practice of tying the tongue down to the mandible, which is permitted in horse racing in most countries. And I've had the opportunity to write and publish with scientists with expertise in human and equine oral anatomy and physiology, and I've spent years asking questions. One of the experts is an equine and human dentist from Sweden, Torbjörn Lundström, who created this wonderful series of images I'm going to show now, which illustrate the problem for the horse. Torbjörn has made a composite of photographs and radiographs so we can see past the lips and inside the horse's mouth. You can see the teeth, the premolars, the canines and the incisors. But take a look at the top of the tongue against the soft palate. There's a definite thickening of the tongue, just rostral of the interdental space and diastema. This illustration of the equine tongue helps. It is this part here. Remember that as a teenager, I was thoughtless enough to tell others that the shape of the tongue and bars helps accommodate the bit, as if God had designed it like that so we could achieve dominion of the horse more easily. But it turns out there's a biological explanation. Of course there is. Torbjorn explained that first, sensations on the tongue, like the pressure of the bit, trigger swallowing, chewing movements and saliva production. Obviously, a main function of the tongue is to move food around when it enters the mouth, so it can be tasted, chewed and swallowed. And obviously this is a very important job for an animal who grazes up to 16 hours a day. Second, the interdental space is not there for the bit, it's an opening so the horse can get rid of anything they've taken into the mouth that they don't want to swallow, like grit or toxic plants. Remember that horses don't vomit, so once swallowed, good or bad, it has to go through the system. So it turns out that the thickening of the tongue is what helps push foreign objects down and out of the mouth. Going back to the series of images, when you put the bit inside the mouth, things change. You can just about see that the tongue now has a bit of an indent on the top from the mouthpiece. You can also see the indent in this photo, although the fleshy lower lip once again gets in the way and you can't really see the bars anymore. The lips act as curtains and hide what's really going on. When the rein is pulled to give a contact, you can see that the tongue is heavily deformed against the mandible. The double bridle is of course more of the same, but potentially twice as much space is being occupied. And of course under tension, the curb chain, the bars and the mouthpiece act together and clamp the tongue. Now I want to show you a different perspective. This is a section through a horse's head. It's not from that chestnut horse there, but a dead one. The head was fitted with a snaffle bit and deep frozen before sections were cut with a bandsaw, like the red line shows. The brown pink shape in the middle, labeled G, is the tongue. And we have the mandible and lower premolars, labeled E, and the palate, labeled A. As you can see, the tongue and other oral tissues occupy virtually the entire cavity. There is no room for a mouthpiece in there. This is the next section, cut slightly lower. At the point where the snaffle bit lies, you can see the center joint of the snaffle has been cut slightly, labeled H, and you can clearly see that the tongue is deformed by the snaffle's mouthpiece. Take note of the mandible, the shape of the bars. Even before you apply rein tension, you have deformed the tongue and you're pressing it against the bars. And of course, if you put two bits in the horse's mouth and you pull, things are going to get more uncomfortable. This image is from another great anatomy resource that is available online. It's another cross-section of the horse's head. These pockets here are the corners of the lips. So again, this section is cut approximately where the mouthpiece goes, depending on the type of bit and how high it is placed. The red highlights the shape of the tongue, filling the space between the green mandible and the palate. The thin green line is the soft palate and the thicker line, the hard palate. This green line on the very top is the famous nasal bone. This is the part where you should slide two fingers or a taper gauge when you adjust the noseband, according to the traditional rule. And basically all of this is soft tissue, the fleshy lips, and of course the tongue is also soft tissue. These are the soft tissues being compressed and deformed when the bit and noseband act in combination. These two dots might be interesting. These are major blood vessels. They're likely to be the lingual arteries, and they are in the firing line to be compressed against the bars, restricting blood flow. Of course, these are just two major vessels, but the entire oral cavity is highly vascularized and innervated, and especially the tongue. Now consider the action of the curb. Here's a curb with a loose rein, and watch the mouthpiece move dorsally and caudally when we add rein tension. Thanks to the curb chain, the mouthpiece pulls back and the mandible pushes forward, and they act as a clamp on the tongue and other soft tissues. Maintaining a clamp tightly clamped on the tongue will restrict blood flow and is likely to cause significant pain, perhaps permanent damage. Compression of the arteries is the most serious. It leads to ischemia. That's when oxygen is not available in sufficient quantities at the tissue level to maintain adequate healthy cell function. It is very painful and can cause permanent tissue damage quickly and may lead to necrosis. When the more delicate veins are compressed or restricted, the blood cannot return to the heart and you get pooling. The tissue changes color to blue or purple. This also causes additional inflammation, which may aggravate compression and contribute to ischemia if it wasn't there in the first place. When tissues are under threat, nociceptors, the pain receptors, will send pain signals to the brain. This is because pain has a very important job to do, which is to motivate the horse to protect the tissues, to do something to restore the blood flow. Because if blood flow is not restored, the tissues will become anoxic and start dying. This is why we also rely on behavioral signs of pain. So what do horses do when they are wearing a bit? What is the behavioral evidence? Well, if they're in a passive situation, they'll just rest the tongue and the bit will sit in the indent that the mouthpiece makes. But they may swallow from time to time, which, by the way, helps clear the airway and probably helps restore the blood flow. They may, however, seize the bit in the molars, or they may use the thick body of the tongue to try pushing the bit out. Some studies have shown that the horse wraps the tongue around the bit, so above it and below it. And while it has been explained as them creating a cushion, it's very likely that this behavior is the reflexive response of trying to get rid of the bit, trying to push it out of the mouth, rather than a conscious strategy. Of course, horses will eventually give up trying to rid themselves of the foreign object in order to save energy, and that's what we call habituation. To keep a healthy blood flow in a tongue that is compressed by the presence of a mouthpiece or two, we should allow the horse to move the tongue around, and for that we have to allow mouth opening and also use very soft rein pressures. But yet riders are encouraged to ride into a contact and also prevent mouth opening. Using nosebands, riders can avoid penalties for mouth opening and prevent judges from seeing the tongue, because tradition dictates that we should consider mouth opening a resistance or an evasion instead of a sign of discomfort or pain. And as soon as we blame the horse for bad behavior, we incentivize more punitive measures, more tightening and more pressure. The public discourse has been reaching breaking point in the last few weeks, with high-resolution images of a number of dressage horses showing very compressed blue or purple tongues, some even showing signs of lacerations, and all showing facial expressions of pain. These images should be taken seriously. There are many horses affected, and they were taken at different moments and in the competition arena. In a follow-up article to counter accusations that the images had been manipulated, the newspaper published a series of images of blue tongues from a variety of other sources, including stock images sourced from Getty Images. And this time, Professor Paul McGreevy highlighted the painful effects of restricting the tongue's blood flow. Equine veterinarians who saw these images are very concerned, but so should the sport as a whole, for it can really threaten the sport's social license. The Swedish Veterinary Association had to intervene to correct misinformation. They published a public statement against the Swedish TV commentators who are stuck on the resistance narrative and blame the horse for giving himself a blue tongue by pushing on the bit. The commentators also said the rules did not include any details on what color the tongue should be, so the riders did nothing wrong. In reality, the rules don't need to cover every organ of the body and describe what color it should be. The FEI rules clearly specify that no equipment should harm the horse. Riders who are manipulating bits in ways that are likely to cause intense pain and could be leading to even permanent tissue damage could be violating the animal welfare legislation of their country. They could be committing a welfare crime. This may be serious and we may need more evidence. So let's look at the experimental research in this area. There is indeed a gap in the scientific literature into how bit pressure affects the equine tongue tissues specifically and at the physiological level. But there is one interesting and relevant study from the University of Sydney. It is part of a master's thesis and was conducted by Dom Weller. This study looked specifically at arterial compression caused by an elastic tongue tie. For those not familiar with tongue ties, one type of tongue tie that is permitted in horse racing is a large elastic band. It is wrapped twice around the tongue. Then the remainder of the band is stretched and slipped over the lower jaw. It secures the tongue to the lower jaw, and again, of course, it stops the tongue from coming over the bit. That's mainly why they are used. And again, when the horse's lips are closed, we really don't know what's going on inside with the oral tissues. For this research on tongue tie arterial compression, Dom used 2 fresh cadavers. He injected the lingual arteries with a resin, then the head was immersed in acid to dissolve the soft tissues and leave resin casts of the arterial network. And both horses showed clear arterial compression at the site of the tongue tie. This is the red resin cast. This image was taken when some of the soft tissues had not dissolved completely yet, just partially dissolved. Now you're looking at the interdental space. These are the incisors and these are the premolars. And you can see the tongue and the indent where the tongue tie was placed, which apparently broke off during the maceration process. And you can also see just how well irrigated the tongue is and the narrowing and compression of the lingual artery that is very, very thin here at the point of the tongue tie. Here you can see some swelling of the arteries beyond the compressed section, and a note that this is likely to be the site compressed by a curb bit. This is the other horse, the blue. They use blue resin this time, but the same arteries, and the tongue tissues are really dissolved here. There's virtually nothing left, but the lingual arteries are there and show a significant narrowing of the right-hand branch. Arterial compression is what restricts oxygen supply to the tissues and is associated with ischemic pain. Over time, it causes permanent tissue damage. Of course, there are other aspects that could be contributing additional pain. If the arteries are compressed, the veins, which have thinner, weaker walls, are also likely to be compressed, leading to the blood pooling on the tip of the tongue, which is what causes the blue and purple color, and may also be causing inflammation. And the inflammation itself will contribute pain and also cause further compression of arteries and even nerves. Yes, we do need more studies to show the effect of a curb bit under rein tension. However, and as the Equine Ethics and Wellbeing Commission recommended recently, we can't always conduct definitive studies, sometimes because it is unethical to do so. So absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. We have to remember that we are talking here about horses used for sport, for entertainment, for recreation. And animal research ethics committees are there to make sure the studies are really necessary. Sometimes we need to look at other areas, like human research, for example. Oral intubation is a very frequent and even routine procedure in hospitals around the world, whereby an object or two are inserted into the oral cavity, and unless they're correctly placed, can exert downwards pressure on the tongue and constrict its blood flow. In humans requiring airway management, there are published cases warning of the risk of tongue necrosis due to prolonged excessive downward pressure from improperly positioned endotracheal tubes. And a warning that I'm just about to show an unpleasant image, but I won't keep it on the screen for very long. These studies are considered rare, or these cases are considered rare, because anaesthetists are trained to position the tubes in ways that prevent tongue compression, but they are reported. And of course, the equipment is designed for materials that are soft and flexible. So basically, many precautions are taken to prevent damage to all tissues. Of course, a significant limitation to the comparison with horses is that humans are intubated under general anesthetic or medically induced comas. So unlike the performance horse, they have no subjective experience of any kind. And the oxygenation of the tissues is monitored and measured, for example with pulse oximeters, and if there are complications, the medical staff will identify what's known colloquially as an unhappy tongue, and they act quickly to remedy the situation. Another limitation is that humans are not horses. However, while they vary in shape and size, mammalian tongues are all highly vascularized and sensitive to compression, and the large body of evidence-based practice in humans should be acknowledged when considering injuries, pain, and permanent tongue damage in horses who are ridden with bits. It's also important to mention that much of the knowledge in human medicine begins with animal experiments. For example, in the late 1940s, my own grandfather, Giuseppe Dretta, made a very significant contribution to the causes of renal failure in crush victims by studying the effects of tourniquet-induced ischemia in rabbits. And his research not only explained renal failure, but also contributed to knowledge of hypertension in humans. And still, not all the relevant research on tourniquets and ischemia has been done for the benefit of humans. Thanks to the increased concern for animals' subjective experiences, we have a really strong body of evidence on pain and distress caused by castration and tail amputation, for example in lambs. Castrations are routinely performed by placing either a steel clamp or a rubber ring that cuts the blood supply and kills the male reproductive organs without surgery, which has a risk of infection. As if any man would need confirmation, all the studies have demonstrated that the pain caused is intense and endures for several hours. Behaviorally, lambs tend to lie down when the pain peaks, and there are mortality and mismothering risks. This review by my mentor and friend, Professor Emeritus David Mello, and his colleague, Kevin Stafford, shows that blood cortisol levels rise sharply within the first hour. The black line in the graph is the effect of placing only a rubber ring. But note the grey line, which is when the steel clamp is also applied. In this case, the rise is faster, but the intensity and the dissipation of the response is the same. In contrast, the lower line is the control group, the lambs that did not undergo castration and had a small and short-lived rise in cortisol from being handled in the same way as the other lambs. All these examples are relevant when considering bit-induced tongue damage, because the scientific and physiological effects of arterial and venous compression are similar in all sensitive body appendages. So where there is solid evidence that blood flow is compromised, we also know the nociceptors, the pain receptors, will be firing signals to the brain. Of course, there are limitations here as well. Castrations are a once-in-a-lifetime event, and the equipment for non-surgical castrations is designed and applied to constrict the tissues as much as is physically possible without cutting. In contrast, we find that blood flow to the if we find that blood flow to the tongue is being compromised routinely and due to the action of the rider, we should be almost even more concerned for the horses, but also for the future of the sport. We need to look closely at the tongues and other oral tissues. We need to pay attention, and going back to my central argument, we should not hide the tongues behind a curtain. We should not allow accessories that make a visual assessment inside the horse's mouth difficult. This is what a heavy contact looks like with a noseband, and this without a noseband. It would be very difficult for anyone, especially a dressage judge, not to notice that something is not working for the horse on the right. But it is a little bit harder to tell with the horse on the left. It is interesting that both riders, though, are using mechanical levers to keep the horse's head low and behind the vertical. The hyperflexed angle is effectively enabling the clamping of the tongue between the bit and the mandible. Note that the horse without a noseband has his tongue tied to the bottom jaw. This reveals he is a racehorse. Tongue tying is legal in racing, and it also suggests he has tried in the past to resolve his tongue problems by getting the tongue over the bit, because he can without a noseband. Without the levers helping riders keep the horse's head in a fixed, low and deep angle, you get into this type of situation where horses try to take control and relieve the clamp. This does not win you any dressage medals. Horses may get the tongue over the bit, and that's not good for anyone either. So wrapping up, I propose that without nosebands or by loosening them significantly, dressage as a sport would incentivize riders to become more skilled and nuanced in their application of negative reinforcement, encouraging them to install reliable responses to very light aids and especially prioritize self-carriage. Self-carriage is achieved when the horse self-maintains the gait, the rhythm, the balance, direction and posture without any other pressure than the rider's weight on their back. These may be just moments in time and might not be perfect, but a horse who responds to subtle changes of the rider's weight and maintains a collected posture with little or no pressure from legs and reins is a product of training that has prioritized self-carriage instead of spectacular, artificial, but very rhythmic movements. And yet, if they turned up at an FEI dressage event, one would not be allowed to compete and the other would not get anywhere near a medal. Causing and ignoring tongue ischemia may well be a welfare crime, but perhaps the worst and underlying crime is that, especially in the last decades, we have perverted the sport of dressage. And what we are seeing is a snowball effect of incentivizing stronger and stronger rein pressures. Researchers have been warning that tight nosebands are a problem, that as well as applying pressure on delicate tissues, they are being used to mask serious training deficiencies. And they've done this since at least 2012, when this solution was designed and proposed to ensure nosebands allow at least some mouth opening. Riders and trainers have lobbied successfully and delayed decisions. They've managed to avoid implementing any useful tightness checks so far. But during those 12 years of inaction, the research has built, showing evidence of distress, oral injuries, and even facial bone deformation caused from repeated impact against the noseband straps. This, combined with evidence of tongue ischemia, could be a tipping point for the sport's social license to operate. If we ride with a bit, we need to either remove nosebands entirely or loosen them significantly, and watch very carefully when our horses show mouth opening. We need to allow it, we need to learn from it, and we need to take responsibility for our training failures and any pain or injury we may cause. We should allow the horse to speak, to tell the world whether their riders really deserve a medal. Thank you.